Well, here we are, live for the weekly podcast, Random Thoughts from County Antrim. My name is David McDonnell, your host, and these are my random thoughts. Today is July 19, 2020, and I know it's July 19 because I looked it up. Frankly, the days and the weeks and the months seem to kind of blur together when you're in a pandemic. And I wasn't sure what date it was until I looked it up. And when I did, it reminded me actually that July 19 is my brother's birthday. So if he's watching, happy birthday. Now, besides losing track of time, I've been going through some withdrawal symptoms during this pandemic, and it's from the lack of live Irish music. It's something I really enjoy, and I've enjoyed going to Irish festivals and Irish pubs and listening to live Irish music. And it's something we haven't had a lot of in the pandemic since all these live events have been canceled. Fortunately, some of my good Irish friends have been doing live podcasts, and they've been performing live on the air. Emmett, my good friend Emmett, who's better known as That Irish Guy, does regular podcasts, as does Bill Mullins. We Banjo 3 has done some wonderful ones. Gaelic Storm, Shane Hennessy, the Black Donnellys. So I've gotten my fix that way by listening to some live podcasts, even though I can't see these folks in person. But it made me think about some Irish musicians and Irish bands and Irish music. And it made me think of a story which I'm about to tell you. Now, before I tell these stories, when I tell any story in front of a live audience, I usually will ask the audience questions. Or maybe I'll turn it into a trivia contest. But I'll ask the audience some different questions, try to get them engaged, engrossed, and thinking about what it is that is the topic of the story. And for this story, what I'll usually ask the audience is, who is Ireland's most famous band? Or stated another way, who is Ireland's most influential musicians or musician? Or what Irish music has had more impact on the world, or at least the 20th century world, than any other? And I'll get a lot of answers. I'll often get U2, Mary Black or Sinead O'Connor, Dolores O'Riordan and Cranberries, sometimes Van Morrison. Some of the traditionalists might say Tommy Makem or the Chieftains. And all of those are excellent answers, but they're not really what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is a different band, which I think trumps the others. And first, the backstory. Well over 1 million Irish left Ireland during and immediately after the Great Hunger, the period of time some Americans refer to as the potato famine, but during the time of immense poverty and starvation and hunger within Ireland. Now, the preferred destination of most of them was the United States. And they arrived in the port cities of America in droves. They also sailed to Canada and Australia and elsewhere in the world, throughout the world, every continent perhaps, with the exception of Antarctica. But many left Ireland but never emigrated anywhere. Trick question, I'm sure. But you see, Ireland at the time was part of the United Kingdom. The name of the country was the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. So these Irish left the island of Ireland, but they never left the United Kingdom. And they settled in various places within the UK, most commonly London, different places in Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Bristol in England. But the most common destination for these Irish was Liverpool. Liverpool developed a very huge Irish population in the 19th century, with the highest concentration of those being on Merseyside. And by the way, that's how the locals say it. People don't live in Merseyside, they live on Merseyside. The same way, I guess I could say I live on America. I don't live in America, on America. It's kind of amazing what difference a preposition can make. But that's how they say it in Liverpool. Now, the world's, I think, most famous band had 4 members. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them. Now, first of all, there were the O'Leanans. The O'Leanan clan originated in the west of Ireland. And there are at least 3 different O'Leanan clans. There was one that lived in Fermanagh, another in County Mayo near Killala, in that region of the county. There's another clan, O'Leanan clan, in Galway. But one of these O'Leanans migrated to Dublin. And John O'Leanan was born there. And shortly after the Great Hunger, John moved to Liverpool. Now, once in Liverpool, John met and married Polly Maguire. The Maguires were an ancient clan from County Fermanagh. And I don't know when this family of Maguires moved from Ireland to Liverpool, but again, it was sometime after the Great Hunger. Now, John and Polly had a son named Alfred, and many other kids for that matter. I think they had 7 or 8. When John died, Polly couldn't take care of her children, and she sent them all to an orphanage. And Alfred was only 7 years old at the time. But somewhere along the line, either in Ireland or in Liverpool, the O'Leanan's name took a slight change. The O was dropped. It was fairly common in Ireland in the 19th century to drop the O or the Mick or the Mock. It's when the O'Kennedys became the Kennedys, and the O'Reillys became the Rileys, and the O'Leanans became the Leanans. And the name spelling became a little different, became a little more anglicized. The Gaelic spelling, the Irish spelling of names and places became so foreign-looking to English that many of them were changed to look more English. And somewhere along the line, the spelling of Leanan was changed. And with that, the pronunciation changed. Instead of Leanan, it became Lennon. Now, Alfred Lennon became a merchant seaman based out of Liverpool. And he married Julia Stanley in Liverpool. Julia's parents were originally from Wales, but then moved to Liverpool. And Alfred and Julia had one son named John. Now, Alfred and Julia were soon separated. After that, Julia took care of John for a period of time. But Julia had some issues. I won't go over in detail. There's some biographies that go through that in greater detail, but I won't do that now. But John was raised by his aunt Mary Stanley Smith, and lived with her in Liverpool throughout his childhood and his teenage years. Now, somewhere along the line, as a teenager, actually, Julia did pay John a visit, gave him a guitar. John was fascinated with the guitar and took it up immediately. And Mary famously said to John, the guitar's all right, John, but you will never make a living out of it. Now, this John, of course, is John Lennon, who indeed made a pretty good living out of a guitar. Now, the other person I want to tell you about is Paul McCartney. His mother was Mary Teresa Mann, and her father was Owen Mann. And Owen was born in County Monaghan in 1880. Now, the McMahon ancestors, date back in County Monaghan for generations. And County Antrim was once known as the McMahon country. But somewhere along the line, this particular McMahon family dropped the Mick and became the Mann family, Mahon. Now, Owen moved from Ireland to Glasgow, and later from there to Liverpool. And he married a woman there of Irish descent, and they had several children, including Paul's mother, Mary. Now, when Mary's mother died, actually, Owen took Mary and her siblings back to County Monaghan. There he married another Irish woman and later took the entire family back to Liverpool. Now, young Mary later met her future husband in Liverpool. His name was James Paul McCartney. They met actually in an air raid shelter, one of the German bombings of Liverpool. All the civilians went into the air raid shelter, subway stations, wherever, and that's where Mary met James Paul. Now, little is known of James' Irish heritage. Some suggest that James' father, who was also named James, was born in Ireland. Others suggest that it was his grandfather, who was also named James, was the first to leave Ireland. But whichever it was, the migration was two steps. It was from Ireland to Scotland and then to Liverpool. Now, there are many sources of the name McCartney. The Gaelic McCartney is pronounced in English the same as the English. And there's a Scottish clan in the Galloway area of Scotland, and many families from that region migrated to Northern Ireland in the early 16th century, and that's probably where James McCartney's ancestors arrived, when and where they arrived to Ireland. Now, there are some Irish clans of similar names, and it's possible that the name McCartney came from an Irish clan, but more likely it came from a Scottish clan from Galloway who migrated to Ireland in the 16th century and then back across the channel to Scotland, and then from Scotland to Liverpool. But in either event, Paul McCartney is certainly a son of Erin. Now, I'll tell you about a third gentleman. George Harrison may have the least sounding Irish surname, but he perhaps is the most Irish of the Beatles. And his heritage comes from his mother's side. His mother's maiden name was French. And I don't mean that it was a French-sounding name or came from France. Rather, her maiden name was Louise French. Now, her father, John French, emigrated from Ireland to Liverpool in the 19th century, right during the Great Hunger. Now, John's parents, John French, it's spelled with two F's, by the way, F-F-R-E-N-C-H, and Ellen Whalen were survivors of the Great Hunger, and they lived in County Wexford. Now, George's traceable family tree goes back at least to the 13th century. His ancestors were Norman knights who settled in Wexford, and they were dubbed French by the locals, and this stuck and became their last name. And the family was Catholic, and they lost their estates during the Cromwell era. They were lords before the Cromwell era and became impoverished thereafter. And they lived as peasant farmers. And somewhere along the way, they dropped the redundant F and just became French. French. Now, Louise French met and married Harold Harrison in Liverpool around the same time in late 1930s, early 1940s, and they had a son named George. And there you have it, 3 of the 4 Beatles. Now, Ringo Starr's last name, or real name, is Richard Starkey, of course. And Ringo's Irish heritage, if indeed there is one at all, is a bit more tenuous, a little more remote than the other Beatles. If there is one, it's a connection from one family line which may have some roots in the County Mayo. But in any event, Ringo's a percussionist. And percussionists don't count. Now, I can say that because I was a drummer, my 2 sons were drummers, and all 3 of us can tell you that percussionists don't get no respect. Why? I don't know. They just don't. Now, if you've ever done geological research, you know it takes a lot of work. And I did not do any of this work for the Beatles. There are many, many sites online which trace the genealogy of the 4 Beatles, which is amazing in and of itself. There are so many people who are just infatuated with the Beatles that they devoted hours and hours of work and research to come up with these genealogies. But I'm telling you the story, and I've told the story elsewhere for a different reason. And that is to demonstrate the Irish influence on British culture. Because indeed much has been written on the influence of the Irish on American culture and on Canadian culture and on our history. But much less on that influence on the British. And the British, the Beatles, I should say, were more recognized worldwide in the latter decades of the 20th century than anyone else from Great Britain. More than Queen Elizabeth, more than any prime minister, or any writer, or any scientist, or any TV or movie star, or more than any other musician. And I just find it fascinating that 75% of the Beatles are descended from those who fled Ireland in the years of the Great Hunger or in the few years thereafter. So that's my story. So don't forget, watch these other podcasts that I refer to, and also take a look at mine. You can find this and other podcasts at my website. Just hit the icon on the homepage, the Random Thoughts from County Ireland. Excuse me, I can't talk at this point. Maybe I should have a cup of coffee. But it was Random Thoughts from County Antrim. I have an icon on my homepage. Click that icon, and you can get to a link to all my other podcasts. My website is clandonnell.net. Please like and share Clandonnell on Facebook. And send me an email. I'm at clandonnell@gmail.com. You can take a look at excerpts of my book, Clandonnell, A Storied History of Ireland, and By the Horse of Guinness. And in the meantime, be safe, be smart, and do the right thing. So goodbye for now, and Shlán.